Dr. Kim Tae-ho wiped the dust from his hands as he stared at the massive crystal formation buried deep in the ancient ruins. 3 months of careful digging on the dead planet Kepler 442c had led to this moment. The crystal was unlike anything he had seen before. It pulsed with a soft blue light that seemed to respond to his presence. "Dr. Kim, you need to see this," called Park So-young from across the excavation site. The young linguist was crouched over her tablet, her face pale with excitement and worry. Tae-ho walked over, his boots crunching on the dried alien soil. The planet had been dead for thousands of years, but the ruins they had found were much older than that. The structures were clearly built by the precursors, an ancient race that had vanished long before most current galactic civilizations had even learned to make fire. "What did you find?" Tae-ho asked, looking over So-young's shoulder at the strange symbols covering her screen. "It's a warning," she said quietly. "But not just any warning. It's about us, about humans." Colonel Lee Dong-woo approached from the main dig site, his military uniform dusty from the day's work. Despite being a soldier, he had proven surprisingly useful at the archaeological site. His attention to detail and systematic approach had helped them uncover artifacts that might have been missed otherwise. "What kind of warning?" Dong-woo asked, his voice carrying the steady tone of someone used to bad news. So-young pointed to a section of text on her tablet. "This symbol here means forbidden or banned. And this section describes a species that matches human biology almost perfectly. Bipedal, carbon-based, specific brain structure, even our average lifespan." Tae-ho felt a chill run down his spine. "That's impossible. These ruins are at least 50,000 years old. Humans weren't even close to space travel." "Then, that's what makes this so strange," So-young continued. "According to this text, there was another species before us. They called them the Ancestrals. The description matches humans in almost every way, except they were more advanced. Much more advanced." Dong-woo frowned. "What happened to them?" So-young's fingers moved across the tablet as she translated more of the ancient text. "It says they were banned from something called the Great Conflicts, but it doesn't say why. Just that they were too dangerous to participate in galactic wars." The 3 humans stood in silence for a moment, looking out at the alien landscape around them. The planet's 2 suns were setting, casting long shadows across the ancient ruins. In the distance, they could see more crystal formations like the one they had been studying. "We need to access that main crystal," Tae-ho said finally. "If there are more records stored in it, we need to know what they say." They had been trying to access the large crystal for weeks. It was clearly some kind of data storage device, but their equipment couldn't interface with it properly. Every attempt to scan it had resulted in partial readings that made little sense. "I might have an idea," Dong-woo said. "What if the crystal responds to biological signatures? Most precursor technology we've found has some kind of biointerface component." So-young looked up from her tablet. "You mean touch it directly? What if it's dangerous?" "Everything we do out here is dangerous," Tae-ho replied. "But if this information is about humans, maybe it will respond to human contact." They returned to the main crystal formation as the planet's suns disappeared below the horizon. The crystal's blue glow became more prominent in the darkness, casting an eerie light on the surrounding ruins. Tae-ho approached the crystal slowly. It was about 3 meters tall and 2 meters wide, with a surface that looked smooth but felt rough under his fingers. As soon as his hand made contact with the crystal, the blue light intensified. Suddenly, symbols began appearing in the air, above the crystal. They were made of light, floating and rotating slowly in a 3-dimensional display that none of them had ever seen before. "So-young, are you getting this?" Tae-ho called out, not daring to remove his hand from the crystal. "Recording everything," she replied, her tablet capturing the light display from multiple angles. The symbols continued to appear, forming what looked like a complex document or report. Some sections pulsed brighter than others, as if emphasizing important points. "It's responding to you specifically," Dongwu observed. "The display changed when you touched it, but it's staying stable as long as you maintain contact." For the next hour, Taeho kept his hand on the crystal while So Young recorded and began translating the information that appeared. What they learned was disturbing. The document was indeed about the ancestrals, a species that had existed in their galaxy tens of thousands of years ago. They had been remarkably similar to humans in almost every way. But according to the precursor records, they had been banned from participating in galactic conflicts by unanimous decision of all advanced civilizations. "This section talks about something called the Great Prohibition," So Young said, her voice tense with concentration. "It was a galactic law specifically designed to prevent any species matching the ancestral profile from engaging in interstellar warfare." "But why?" Dongwu asked. "What made them so dangerous?" So Young continued reading. "It says they had an unusual ability to understand and adapt to conflict. They didn't just fight wars, they revolutionized them. They could develop new strategies and technologies faster than their enemies could respond." The crystal display shifted, showing what appeared to be star maps and battle formations. Even without understanding the specifics, it was clear that the ancestrals had been involved in conflicts across multiple star systems. "Look at this," Taeho said, studying the floating symbols. "These formations don't look like any military tactics I've ever seen. They're too complex, too creative." Dongwu nodded grimly. "It's like they were playing a completely different game than everyone else." As the night progressed, they learned more disturbing details. The ancestrals hadn't just been good at warfare, they had been so effective that they had threatened the stability of the entire galaxy. Other civilizations had been forced to work together to contain them. But what happened to them? Taeho wondered aloud. If they were banned from wars, where did they go? The crystal display flickered and showed a final set of symbols. So Young's face went pale as she translated them. "They vanished," she whispered. "Just disappeared from galactic records about 47,000 years ago. No one knows what happened to them." As dawn approached on the dead planet, the three humans finally stepped away from the crystal. The implications of what they had discovered were staggering. If the precursor records were accurate, then humanity might be the second appearance of a species type that had once been considered too dangerous for galactic civilization. "We need to report this to Earth immediately," Dongwu said. Taeho nodded, but his mind was already racing with questions. Had the galactic community already noticed the similarities between humans and the ancestrals? Was that why human involvement in interstellar conflicts had always seemed limited despite their technological capabilities? As they packed up their equipment, none of them noticed that the crystal continued to pulse with blue light long after they had stopped touching it. Deep within its crystalline structure, other records waited to be discovered, records that would reveal just how much the current galactic civilizations knew about humanity's potential. The discovery on Kepler 442c was just the beginning of a revelation that would shake the foundations of human understanding about their place in the galaxy. Ambassador Choi Hae-jin stood before the massive curved table of the Galactic Council chambers on Vega Prime. The room was designed to accommodate dozens of different alien species, with varied atmosphere controls and seating arrangements. Today, however, the tension in the air was thick enough that even the environmental systems seemed strained. The news from Kepler 442c had reached the Council faster than Hae-jin had expected. Within hours of Dr. Kim Taeho's initial report to Earth, representatives from major galactic civilizations had called for an emergency session. That speed alone told her that this discovery had touched on something the alien civilizations had been worried about for a long time. "The human delegation will present their findings," announced the Zephyrian High Chancellor, her voice carrying through the chamber's translation systems in a dozen different languages and communication methods. Jin activated the holographic display at the center of the chamber. The images from the precursor crystal appeared in three-dimensional detail, showing the ancient symbols and star maps that her team had discovered. "Honored delegates," she began. "3 days ago, our archaeological team uncovered precursor records that mention a species called the Ancestrals. According to these records, the Ancestrals shared remarkable biological and psychological similarities with humanity." A low rumble came from the crystalline collectives section of the chamber. The silicon-based entities communicated through harmonic vibrations, and their current tone suggested deep unease. The records indicate that these ancestrals were subject to something called the Great Prohibition. Jin continued. They were specifically banned from participating in galactic conflicts by universal agreement among advanced civilizations. The Torvan representative, a large creature with multiple arms and eyes, spoke up. "Ambassador Choi, are you suggesting that humans are somehow connected to this ancient species?" "We're not suggesting anything," Jin replied carefully. "We're simply sharing what we found. However, the biological descriptions in the precursor records do match human characteristics with surprising accuracy." High Chancellor Veltar of the Zephyrians exchanged what appeared to be meaningful looks with several other delegates. The Zephyrians were one of the oldest current civilizations in the galaxy, and their reactions often provided insight into historical knowledge that other species lacked. "Perhaps," the High Chancellor said slowly, "it is time to share certain historical records that have been preserved in our archives." The chamber fell silent. Even the constant background hum of life support systems seemed to quiet as every delegate focused on the Zephyrian leader. 48,000 years ago, Veltar began, our ancestors were part of a galactic community that faced an unprecedented threat, not from external invasion or natural disaster, but from a single species that had mastered the art of warfare beyond all reasonable limits. A new holographic display appeared, showing star charts and battle formations that looked disturbingly similar to what the humans had found in the precursor crystal. "The species you call the Ancestrals did not simply fight wars," the High Chancellor continued. "They understood conflict in ways that other civilizations could not comprehend. They could predict how battles would develop months in advance. They could turn the strengths of their enemies into weaknesses. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to view war not as a necessary evil, but as a form of art to be perfected." The crystalline collective's harmonic communication grew more intense, creating complex patterns of sound that the translation systems struggled to convert into words. Finally, a synthesized voice spoke for them. "We remember the fear," the collective said. "Our earliest memory crystals contain warnings passed down from our predecessors. The Ancestrals could win wars without fighting battles. They understood systems of conflict that we could not even perceive." Jin felt a chill run through her. "What kind of systems?" "Economic warfare that could collapse entire civilizations." "Within months," replied the Torvan delegate. "Psychological operations that could turn populations against their own governments. Technological innovations that could adapt to any defense within days of encountering it. But most frightening," added a new voice from the chamber's upper levels, "was their ability to think several moves ahead of everyone else. They didn't just respond to conflicts, they shaped them." The speaker was from the Ethereal Confederacy, a species that rarely participated in council sessions. Their presence indicated just how seriously the galactic community was taking this discovery. "The Great Prohibition was not just a law," the ethereal representative continued. "It was a survival mechanism. The galaxy had reached a point where the Ancestrals' involvement in any major conflict could have led to the collapse of interstellar civilization itself." Jin processed this information with growing concern. "What happened to them? The precursor?" "Records indicate they simply vanished from galactic history." The chamber fell silent again. Several delegates exchanged looks that suggested they knew more than they were willing to share. "That," said High Chancellor Veltar finally, remains one of the great mysteries of galactic history. They disappeared suddenly and completely. No trace of their civilization was ever found after the prohibition was enacted. But now, added the Crystalline Collective, a species matching their profile has emerged again. The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Hyojin realized that she was not just sharing archaeological findings, but potentially announcing humanity's resemblance to what the galaxy considered its greatest historical threat. "Honorable delegates," she said carefully, "humanity has been part of the galactic community for over 2 centuries. We have participated in trade, cultural exchange, and limited military cooperation. Surely our track record speaks for itself." "Limited military cooperation," repeated the Torvan delegate with emphasis. "Yes, we have all noticed that human involvement in major conflicts has been restricted." Hyojin's blood ran cold. "What do you mean by that?" "Technical difficulties during critical deployments," listed the High Chancellor. "Diplomatic solutions that emerge just as human forces are about to engage. Third-party interventions that prevent full human military participation." "You've been managing us," Hyojin realized with horror. "All this time you've been deliberately limiting human involvement in galactic conflicts." "Not managing," corrected the ethereal representative. "Observing, testing, trying to determine if humanity would follow the same path as the ancestrals." The revelation hit Hyojin like a physical blow. Every time human military forces had been deployed to assist in galactic conflicts, every time technical problems had prevented their full participation, every diplomatic solution that had emerged, at the last moment, it had all been orchestrated to keep humanity from demonstrating their true military capabilities. "And what have you concluded from your observations?" she asked, though she dreaded the answer. The chamber remained silent for long moments. Finally, High Chancellor Veltar spoke. "Your species shows the same pattern recognition abilities, the same adaptive creativity, the same systems thinking that made the ancestrals so formidable. The few military advisors you have been permitted to deploy have consistently produced strategies that shocked our military commanders with their effectiveness. But," added the Crystalline Collective, "you have also shown restraint and ethical considerations that the ancestrals lacked. This gives us hope that perhaps history will not repeat itself." Hyojin straightened her shoulders. "What exactly are you proposing?" "Continued observation," said the Torvan delegate. "Careful monitoring of human military development, and most importantly, maintaining the current restrictions on your involvement in major galactic conflicts." "In other words," Hyojin said coldly, "you want to continue treating humanity as a potential threat rather than as an equal member of the galactic community." The silence that followed was answer enough. As the session concluded and delegates began filing out of the chamber, Hyojin realized that humanity's discovery on Kepler 442c had opened a door that could never be closed again. The galaxy's other civilizations had been watching and judging humanity for centuries, measuring them against the memory of a species that had once threatened to destroy everything. The question now was whether humanity would accept continued restrictions based on ancient fears or demand the right to prove that they were not destined to repeat the ancestrals' path. Either choice would reshape humanity's relationship with the galactic community forever. Captain Nam Hyun-woo sat in his cramped office aboard the intelligence vessel Sejong, staring at data streams that painted a picture he didn't want to believe. For the past 3 weeks, ever since Ambassador Choi's report from the Galactic Council, he had been digging through classified military records spanning the last 2 centuries of human space exploration. What he found was a pattern so subtle and so consistent that it could only have been deliberately orchestrated. "Computer, display timeline analysis for human military deployment incidents 2187 to present," he commanded. The holographic display filled his office with dates, locations, and incident reports. Each entry represented a moment when human military forces had been prevented from full engagement in galactic conflicts through seemingly random technical failures, diplomatic interventions, or third-party complications. The Rigel border conflict of 2298, human cruiser engines had suffered simultaneous failures just as the fleet prepared to engage hostile forces. The failures were later attributed to a rare computer virus that had never been seen before or since. The Centauri trade war of 2341. A diplomatic solution had emerged within hours of human forces reaching the conflict zone, mediated by the Zephyrian government despite their previous neutrality on the issue. The Vega expansion crisis of 2356. Third-party intervention by the Crystalline Collective had ended hostilities just as human tactical innovations were beginning to turn the tide of battle. Hyun-woo rubbed his tired eyes. The pattern was clear, but the coordination required to maintain it across multiple civilizations and centuries suggested a level of galactic cooperation that humanity had never suspected. His communication system chimed with an incoming message from Dr. Park So-young on Kepler 442c. Since the discovery of the precursor crystal, she had been working around the clock to translate additional records. Captain Nam? So-young's image appeared on his screen, her face drawn with exhaustion but bright with excitement. I've found something you need to see. The precursor records contain detailed descriptions of ancestral military strategies and psychological profiles. What kind of descriptions? Hyun-woo asked, though he suspected he already knew where this was leading. They describe a species that approached warfare as a complete system rather than a series of individual battles. The ancestrals didn't just fight wars, they understood the underlying patterns that create and sustain conflicts. So-young transmitted a data package that filled Hyun-woo's screen with translated precursor text. As he read, his concern deepened. The descriptions of ancestral thinking patterns were uncomfortably familiar. Look at this section, So-young continued, highlighting specific passages. The ancestrals had an unusual ability to see connections between seemingly unrelated events. They could predict how political decisions would affect military outcomes months in advance. They viewed economic systems, social structures, and military capabilities as interconnected parts of a larger whole. Hyun-woo thought about the human military advisors he had worked with throughout his career. That kind of systems thinking was exactly what made human tacticians so effective in the limited roles they had been allowed to play. There's more, So-young said. The records describe something called adaptive innovation under pressure. The ancestrals could rapidly develop new technologies and strategies when faced with unexpected challenges. They seemed to thrive on problem-solving in crisis situations. That sounds like every human military unit I've ever served with, Hyun-woo muttered. Exactly. And according to these records, that's what made them so dangerous. Other species would plan for known threats and established tactics. The ancestrals would adapt and innovate faster than their enemies could respond. After ending the call with So-young, Hyun-woo turned his attention to another disturbing discovery. Buried in classified archives, he had found records of human military advisors who had been assigned to minor galactic conflicts over the past 50 years. Their performance reports made for fascinating reading. Lieutenant Colonel Oh Min-jung's report from the Outer Rim piracy suppression campaign was typical. In just 6 weeks, she had developed new patrol patterns that reduced pirate activity by 70%. Her innovations had been so effective that they were still being used by galactic security forces decades later. Major Kim Sung-ho's work during the asteroid mining disputes had resolved a conflict that had been dragging on for 3 years. His solution involved economic incentives and resource-sharing agreements that none of the involved parties had previously considered. Commander Lee Ji-yoon had ended the frontier colony rebellions not through military force, but by identifying and addressing the underlying social and economic issues that had caused the conflicts in the first place. The pattern was consistent across dozens of assignments. Human military advisors didn't just solve immediate problems, they found solutions that other species couldn't conceive of. They approached conflicts with a combination of creativity, systems thinking, and adaptability that consistently surprised alien commanders. Hyun-woo's research was interrupted by a priority message from Admiral Yoon Jae-sung at Terran Defense Command. The Admiral's weathered face appeared on screen, his expression grim. "Captain Nam, I need you to return to Earth immediately. We've discovered something that changes everything." "What kind of something, sir?" "Intelligence reports from our embassy, staff at various alien worlds. It turns out our exclusion from major conflicts has been even more systematic than we thought. Admiral Yoon transmitted classified files that detailed decades of intercepted communications between alien governments. The contents were shocking. Not only had major galactic civilizations been coordinating to limit human military involvement, they had been actively studying human tactical approaches and psychological profiles. "They've been treating us like a research subject, Admiral," Yoon said bluntly. "Every time we've been allowed limited participation in conflicts, they've been taking notes, analyzing our methods, cataloging our innovations, trying to understand how our minds work." Hyun-woo felt a surge of anger. "Have they reached any conclusions? That's what worries me most. According to these intercepts, they're split between two schools of thought. Some believe humans can be safely integrated into galactic military affairs with proper safeguards. Others think we should be quarantined like the ancestrals were." The implications were staggering. Humanity had spent 2 centuries building relationships with galactic civilizations, believing they were earning trust and respect through their contributions to trade, science, and culture. Instead, they had been viewed as a potential threat to be monitored and contained. "Sir, what are our options?" Admiral Yoon was quiet for a moment. "That depends on what we want to achieve. We could accept the status quo and continue operating under alien oversight. We could demand full participation in galactic affairs and risk being seen as proving their fears correct. Or what, sir? We could demonstrate that humanity has learned from the ancestrals' mistakes, show that we can be trusted with the same military capabilities that made our predecessors so dangerous." Hyun-woo realized that humanity stood at a crossroads. They could remain junior partners in a galactic community that viewed them with suspicion, or they could risk everything to prove that they deserved equal treatment. "Admiral, what do the psychological profiles say about human military thinking compared to other species?" "That's the most disturbing part, Captain. According to alien analysis, humans don't just excel at tactical innovation or strategic planning. We have something they call metacognitive awareness. The ability to think about thinking itself. We can analyze our own thought processes and those of our enemies in ways that other species find impossible to counter." The conversation was interrupted by another incoming message, this one from Dr. Kim Tae-ho on Kepler 442c. His face appeared alongside Admiral Yoon's on Hyun-woo's split screen. "We've made another discovery," Dr. Kim announced without preamble. "The crystal contains records of what happened to the ancestrals. They didn't just disappear, they were given an ultimatum by the galactic community." "What kind of ultimatum?" Admiral Yoon asked. "Submit to permanent monitoring and restriction of their military capabilities or face total war with every advanced civilization in the galaxy." The 3 men sat in silence, absorbing the implications. Humanity might soon face the same choice that had been given to the ancestrals 47,000 years ago. "What did the ancestrals choose?" Hyun-woo asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Dr. Kim's expression was grim. "They chose to fight. And according to these records, they nearly won. The second crystal chamber was hidden 3 kilometers beneath the main excavation site on Kepler 4442c. Dr. Kim Tae-ho and his expanded team had been digging for 2 weeks to reach it, following energy readings that Dr. Song Yunbi's deep scan equipment had detected. What they found when they finally broke through the last barrier made them question everything they thought they knew about ancient warfare. The chamber was vast, easily the size of a football stadium, and filled with dozens of crystal formations that pulsed with different colored lights. Unlike the single blue crystal they had found earlier, these crystals displayed red, purple, and white energy patterns that seemed to react to each other in complex sequences. "It's like a library," whispered Park So-young, her voice echoing in the enormous space. But instead of books, they stored information in living crystal. Colonel Lee Dong-woo approached one of the larger formations cautiously. His military training told him to be careful, but his curiosity about the ancestrals was stronger than his caution. As soon as his hand touched the crystal's surface, the entire chamber erupted in light. Holographic displays filled the air above every crystal formation, creating a three-dimensional information network that surrounded the human team. The displays showed star maps, battle formations, technological schematics, and something else that made Dong-woo's blood run cold: detailed psychological profiles of dozens of alien species. They weren't just fighting wars, he said quietly. They were studying their enemies at a level that goes beyond military intelligence. Dr. Song Eunbi, the team's military psychologist, was already recording everything she could see. Her equipment was barely keeping up with the flood of information being displayed by the crystals. "Look at this," she called out, pointing to a series of holographic displays that showed brain scans and behavioral analysis charts. "These are psychological warfare profiles. The ancestrals had mapped out the mental weaknesses and decision-making patterns of every major species they encountered." So-young was working frantically to translate the text that accompanied the displays. What she found was disturbing beyond anything they had discovered so far. According to this, the ancestrals didn't just study individual alien psychology, she said, her voice shaking slightly. They understood how entire civilizations think. They could predict how alien governments would respond to specific types of pressure, how their economies would react to certain disruptions, even how their military commanders would behave in crisis situations. Taeho moved to another crystal formation that was displaying what appeared to be economic data. The holographic charts showed trade routes, resource flows, and financial networks spanning multiple star systems. They weaponized economics, he realized with growing horror. Look at these models. They show how to collapse the economy of an entire star system by disrupting specific trade relationships and resource supplies. The team spent hours moving from crystal to crystal, each one revealing new aspects of ancestral warfare that went far beyond traditional military tactics. They found records of propaganda campaigns that could turn entire populations against their own governments, technological innovations that could adapt to any defense within days, and strategic plans that operated on timescales of decades rather than months. But the most disturbing discovery came when Colonel Dong-woo accessed a crystal formation in the center of the chamber. The holographic display that appeared showed a complete record of the final war between the ancestrals and the combined galactic civilizations. "This is it," he announced to the team, "the record of what really happened to them." The display showed a conflict that had lasted for 37 years and had involved every major civilization in the galaxy. What made it terrifying was not its scale, but its nature. The ancestrals hadn't fought a traditional war at all. They never engaged in direct battle, Dr. Song observed, studying the tactical displays. Instead, they manipulated their enemies into fighting each other. The record showed how the ancestrals had used their understanding of alien psychology to create conflicts between their enemies. They would provoke tensions between allied civilizations, then step back and watch as the galaxy tore itself apart. When their enemies were weakened by internal fighting, the ancestrals would emerge to claim territory and resources without having to fire a shot. "It's brilliant and terrifying at the same time," So-young said quietly. "They turned the galaxy's strength against itself. The holographic displays showed star system after star system falling under ancestral control through this method. Entire civilizations collapsed, not because they were defeated in battle, but because they were manipulated into destroying themselves through carefully orchestrated conflicts with their neighbors. But something changed, Dongwu noticed, pointing to later sections of the display. In the final years of the war, the pattern shifts. Dr. Song studied the data carefully. The galactic civilizations figured out what was happening. They stopped fighting each other and formed a true alliance against the ancestrals. The final phase of the war showed a completely different pattern. Instead of manipulation and indirect warfare, the records displayed massive direct confrontations between ancestral forces and united galactic fleets. The battles were enormous in scale, involving thousands of ships and entire star systems. Even when forced into direct confrontation, they were winning, Taeho observed with amazement. Look at these battle records. The ancestrals were outnumbered by factors of hundreds to one, but they were still achieving victories. The reason became clear as they studied the tactical displays. The ancestrals had developed warfare technologies and strategies that the galaxy had never seen before. Their ships could adapt their weapons and defenses in real time to counter any threat. Their commanders seemed to anticipate every move their enemies would make, often preparing counter-strategies before their opponents had even decided on their attacks. They weren't just good at war, Dr. Song realized with growing understanding. They had fundamentally changed what war meant. While other species were still thinking in terms of ships and weapons, the ancestrals were operating on a completely different level. The records showed ancestral fleets that could coordinate across multiple star systems simultaneously, economic warfare that could cripple enemy supply lines from the inside, and psychological operations that could break enemy morale before battles even began. But they still lost, So Young pointed out, translating the final sections of the records. The question is how? The answer, when it came, was shocking in its simplicity. The galactic civilizations had realized that they couldn't defeat the ancestrals through military means. Instead, they had offered them something that appealed to their greatest strength and greatest weakness. A challenge, Dongwu read from the translated text. They challenged the ancestrals to a final contest, not a battle, but a test of ultimate strategic thinking. The records showed that the galactic civilizations had proposed a single, galaxy-spanning conflict that would determine the fate of all involved. The rules were simple. Each side would have access to all available resources and technologies, and the winner would take control of the entire galaxy. The ancestrals accepted, So Young continued translating. They couldn't resist the opportunity to prove their superiority in the ultimate test of strategic thinking. But the contest had been a trap. While the ancestrals focused all their attention on solving the strategic puzzle they had been given, the galactic civilizations had been preparing a different kind of solution entirely. They didn't try to outthink the ancestrals, Dr. Song realized. They removed the conditions that made ancestral thinking effective in the first place. The final records showed the ancestrals' home systems being evacuated not through military force, but through a coordinated effort that offered every ancestral individual a choice: accept exile beyond the galaxy's edge or face the consequences of a conflict that would destroy everything they had worked to build. They chose exile, Taeho said quietly. Rather than see their achievements destroyed, they agreed to leave the galaxy entirely. The team stood in silence, absorbing the implications of what they had learned. The ancestrals hadn't been destroyed by their enemies. They had been outmaneuvered by a strategy that used their own perfectionist nature against them. The question, now, Colonel Dongwu said finally, is whether humanity is destined to follow the same path. We have the same capabilities that made the ancestrals so dangerous. Will we also have the same weaknesses? As if in response to his question, new displays appeared on the crystals around them. These showed not historical records, but analysis of current galactic civilizations and their military capabilities. The Ancestrals had been studying the galaxy right up until their exile, and their final gift was a complete intelligence assessment of humanity's potential enemies and allies. Dr. Song looked at the data with professional interest and growing concern. "They left us a roadmap," she said quietly. "Complete intelligence on every major civilization in the galaxy, including detailed analysis of their weaknesses and how to exploit them." General Lim Kyung-soo stood before the massive holographic display in the classified research facility beneath Luna Base, watching human military officers solve problems that had stumped alien strategists for decades. The facility had been hastily constructed following the discoveries on Kepler 442c, designed specifically to test human cognitive abilities in military scenarios without alerting the galactic community to what Earth was doing. "Run Simulation 7 again," he commanded Dr. Seo Won-ho, the facility's lead researcher. The holographic display shifted to show a complex three-dimensional battlefield involving multiple species, unknown technologies, and rapidly changing tactical situations. 12 human officers sat at control stations around the room, each tasked with finding solutions to different aspects of the conflict. "What makes this particularly interesting," Dr. Seo explained as they watched the humans work, "is that we've given them the exact same scenario that stumped a joint alien tactical committee for 6 months last year." General Lim observed the human officers carefully. Unlike the methodical, systematic approach that alien military minds typically employed, the humans seemed to approach the problem from multiple angles simultaneously. They didn't just analyze the immediate tactical situation, they were considering economic factors, psychological elements, and long-term strategic implications all at the same time. "Captain Yu Ji-hai found a solution," Dr. Seo announced, highlighting one of the control stations. Captain Yu's solution appeared on the main display, and General Lim felt his breath catch. She hadn't just solved the tactical problem. She had redefined it entirely. Instead of trying to win the battle through conventional military means, she had identified a way to make the battle itself irrelevant by addressing the underlying political and economic issues that had caused the conflict. "How long did that take her?" General Lim asked. 43 minutes, Dr. Seo replied. "The alien committee spent 6 months and never reached a workable solution." Commander Park In-soo at another station had taken a completely different approach. His solution involved using the enemy's own tactical strengths against them through a series of coordinated feints and psychological operations that would force them into positions where their advantages became disadvantages. "And Lieutenant Colonel Kim Jae-won's approach is different again," Dr. Seo continued. "He's treating the entire scenario as a systems problem rather than a military conflict. His solution involves manipulating the information flow between enemy units to create coordination failures that would cause their forces to effectively defeat themselves." General Lim had been running these tests for 3 weeks, and the results were consistently the same. Human military minds didn't just solve problems differently than aliens, they solved completely different problems. Where alien strategists saw tactical challenges, humans saw systemic opportunities. Where aliens focused on defeating enemies, humans found ways to make conflicts unnecessary. "Dr. Seo, what do you make of the cognitive differences we're observing?" The researcher pulled up brain scan data from the human test subjects. "It's fascinating, General. Human brains show much higher activity in areas associated with pattern recognition and creative problem-solving when facing military scenarios. But more importantly, they demonstrate something we're calling metacognitive awareness, the ability to think about their own thinking processes and adjust them in real time." Explain that in practical terms. When faced with a tactical problem, most alien species follow established thought patterns based on their evolutionary and cultural backgrounds. Humans seem to recognize their own thought patterns and deliberately break out of them to find new approaches. The implications were staggering. If humans could consciously modify their own thinking processes during problem-solving, it meant they could adapt to new types of challenges faster than any other known species. Show me the comparison data with alien military performance, General Lim requested. Dr. SEO brought up a series of charts comparing human and alien performance across various military scenarios. The results were clear. Humans consistently outperformed alien strategists, not just in speed of problem-solving, but in the creativity and effectiveness of their solutions. The most interesting finding, Dr. SEO explained, is in the area of adaptive innovation. When we introduce unexpected variables into the scenarios, new technologies, unknown enemy capabilities, changing environmental conditions, human performance actually improves. They seem to thrive on uncertainty in ways that other species find disabling. General Lim studied the data with growing concern. Everything they were discovering suggested that the galactic community's fears about human military capabilities were justified. Humans weren't just good at warfare, they approached it in ways that other species couldn't counter. Dr. Seo, I want you to run a new test. Instead of giving them tactical scenarios, I want to see how humans approach the concept of warfare itself. The next experiment was unlike anything the facility had attempted before. Instead of specific military problems, the human test subjects were asked to analyze warfare as a general concept and suggest improvements to how conflicts could be approached. The results were disturbing in their implications. Major Lee Sang-hun proposed a framework for strategic conflict resolution that treated wars not as events to be won or lost, but as systems to be understood and redesigned. His approach involved identifying the core drivers of conflict within civilizations and addressing them before they could manifest as military confrontations. Captain Moon Soo-jin developed what she called cognitive warfare, strategies designed to exploit the specific neurological and psychological patterns of different alien species. Her methods could potentially defeat enemies without them even realizing they were under attack. Colonel Oh Kyung-min created a comprehensive model for meta-warfare that operated on multiple levels simultaneously: military, economic, psychological, and technological. His approach could achieve victory conditions that other species might not even recognize as combat objectives. Dr. Seo, General Lim said quietly, are we looking at the evolution of warfare itself? I believe so, General. What we're seeing is human military thinking that operates on a fundamentally different level than anything the galaxy has encountered since the Ancestrals. The General walked to the observation window overlooking the main testing floor. Below, human officers continued working on increasingly complex scenarios, consistently finding solutions that alien military minds had deemed impossible. Have you compared our test results with the ancestral records from Kepler 442c? That's what worries me most, Dr. Seo admitted. The cognitive patterns we're observing in human military thinking match the ancestral patterns almost exactly. The same metacognitive awareness, the same ability to redefine problems instead of just solving them, the same talent for systems thinking that operates across multiple domains simultaneously. But there are differences, General Lim observed. Our people show ethical considerations that the ancestral records don't mention. True, but the question is whether those ethical considerations will remain stable if humans are placed under extreme pressure. The ancestrals may have started with similar values before their circumstances changed. A new alarm sounded, indicating that one of the test subjects had achieved something unprecedented. On the main display, Lieutenant Nam Yeon-soo's solution appeared, and it took both men a moment to understand what they were looking at. She's solved a no-win scenario, Dr. Seo said in amazement. We gave her a situation where every possible military action would result in massive casualties and strategic failure. She found a way to achieve complete victory with 0 casualties on either side. General Lim studied the solution carefully. Lieutenant Nam had approached the problem by analyzing the underlying assumptions that made the scenario appear unsolvable. By changing those assumptions through a combination of technological innovation, diplomatic maneuvering, and psychological manipulation, She had transformed a military disaster into a strategic triumph. Dr. Seo, I think we've learned what we needed to know. Human military capabilities aren't just advanced, they're evolutionary. We're not just better at warfare than other species, we're operating on a completely different conceptual level. What are your recommendations, General? General Lim was quiet for a long moment, watching the human officers below continue their work with enthusiasm and creativity that seemed to increase with each new challenge. We need to make a decision as a species, he said finally. Either we accept the limitations that the galactic community wants to place on us, or we demonstrate that humans can be trusted with capabilities that no other species possesses. And if we're wrong about being able to control these capabilities, then we risk following the same path as the ancestrals. But if we're right, we might be able to solve conflicts that have plagued the galaxy for millennia. As if summoned by their conversation, a priority message arrived from Admiral Yoon Jae-sung. The Admiral's face appeared on the communication screen, his expression grim but determined. Colonel Park In-soo stepped off the transport shuttle onto Kepler Station, the main military headquarters of the Free Worlds Coalition. The station buzzed with desperate activity as officers from a dozen different species worked frantically to find solutions to an impossible military situation. The air was thick with tension and the barely controlled panic of beings who knew they were facing extinction. Colonel Park greeted General Vextar, the Coalition's supreme military commander. The tall, blue-skinned Altarian had the bearing of someone who had won many battles, but his eyes now showed the strain of facing an enemy he couldn't understand. Thank you for coming. I hope your people can see something we've missed. Park In-soo had brought a small team of human military specialists. Captain Moon Soo-jin, an expert in psychological warfare. Major Lee Sang-hun, who specialized in systems analysis. And Lieutenant Nam Yeon-soo, whose gift for creative problem-solving had impressed even the researchers at Luna Base. General Vexitar will need complete access to all intelligence on hegemony capabilities and coalition defensive assets, Park In-soo said, and we'll need your permission to implement solutions that might seem unconventional. The Altarian general's laugh was bitter. Colonel, our conventional approaches have failed completely. At this point, we're willing to try anything. The briefing room was filled with holographic displays showing the military situation in stark detail. The hegemony had developed new weapons and defensive technologies that made traditional warfare obsolete. Their ships could phase through conventional shields, their weapons could adapt to any defensive countermeasure within minutes, and their tactics seemed to anticipate every move the coalition forces made. We've lost 37 battles in the past 6 months, explained Admiral Korth, a massive Torvan whose 4 arms gestured emphatically at the tactical displays. Every time we develop new strategies or technologies, the hegemony finds ways to counter them faster than we can deploy them. Captain Moon Soo-jin studied the battle records with particular interest. General, may I see the psychological profiles of hegemony command staff? Psychological profiles? General Vextar looked confused. We have basic intelligence on their leadership structure, but psychological analysis isn't standard military intelligence for us. The human team exchanged meaningful looks. This was already revealing a fundamental difference in how humans and aliens approached warfare. We'll need to develop those profiles, Moon Soo-jin said. Understanding how enemy commanders think is essential to predicting their actions. Major Lee Sang-hun was examining the economic and supply chain data for both sides of the conflict. General, what's the hegemony's motivation for this expansion? What are they trying to achieve beyond territorial conquest? Another confused look from the alien commanders. Does it matter? They're invading our space. We need to stop them. It matters because different motivations create different vulnerabilities, Lee Sang-hun explained patiently. If we understand why they're fighting, we can find ways to make the fight unnecessary or counterproductive for them. Lieutenant Nam Yeon-soo was studying the technical specifications of hegemony weapons and defenses. These adaptive systems are impressive, But they have a weakness. They're reactive rather than predictive. They respond to threats after encountering them. We tried exploiting that, Admiral Korth said. We developed new weapons and tactics specifically to surprise them, but they adapted faster than we could innovate. That's because you were still thinking in terms of conventional military. Innovation, Nam Yansu replied. What if we created situations that their adaptive systems couldn't respond to because they operate outside normal military parameters? The human team spent the next 3 days immersed in data analysis, developing an understanding of the conflict that went far beyond what the coalition military had considered relevant. They studied hegemony cultural patterns, economic structures, communication protocols, and even recreational activities of their soldiers. Colonel Park, General Vexitar said during their first strategy meeting, "Your people are analyzing data. That has nothing to do with military capabilities. How does knowing about hegemony art forms help us win battles?" Because, Park In-soo explained, their art forms reveal how they think about problems, hierarchies, and change. Understanding their thought patterns lets us predict their military innovations before they make them. The first phase of the human strategy involved something the coalition had never attempted: economic warfare that operated entirely outside the traditional military-industrial framework. Major Lee Sang-hun had identified that the hegemony's rapid adaptation capabilities required massive computational resources and rare mineral supplies. Rather than attacking their military forces directly, he proposed disrupting the economic relationships that supported their technological advantage. "We're going to make their adaptive systems work against them," he explained to the skeptical coalition commanders. "Every time they adapt to a new threat, they consume resources and computational capacity. If we can force them to adapt to multiple, simultaneous, non-military challenges, we can overload their systems." Captain Moon Soo-jin's psychological analysis had revealed that hegemony command structures were based on rigid hierarchical thinking that prioritized individual advancement over collective success. She proposed a series of operations designed to exploit this weakness. "We're going to give their commanders opportunities to compete with each other instead of focusing on us," she said. "Their cultural patterns suggest that internal competition is more important to them than external conquest." The coalition commanders listened with growing amazement as the humans outlined strategies that operated on multiple levels simultaneously. They weren't just planning military operations. They were designing a comprehensive campaign that would reshape the entire nature of the conflict. Lieutenant Nam Yeon-soo's technical innovations were the most radical of all. Instead of developing new weapons to fight hegemony adaptive systems, she proposed creating military technologies that would become more effective the more the enemy tried to adapt to them. Adaptive feedback loops, she called them. Every time their systems learn to counter our technologies learn something new about their systems. Eventually, we'll know more about their capabilities than they do. The first test of human strategy came when a hegemony task force attacked the outer colony of New Geneva. Instead of meeting them with conventional defensive forces, the coalition implemented the human plan. Economic disruption operations targeted the supply chains that supported the hegemony's adaptive technologies, forcing them to operate with reduced capabilities. Psychological warfare broadcasts designed specifically for hegemony cultural patterns created confusion and internal conflict among their forces. Most importantly, the defensive technologies deployed against them were designed to become more effective with each adaptation attempt. The results exceeded even the humans' expectations. The hegemony task force found themselves fighting not just coalition military forces, but economic disruptions that affected their home systems, internal political conflicts sparked by carefully crafted propaganda, and technologies that seemed to anticipate their adaptations before they could implement them. "They're retreating," Admiral Korth announced with amazement. "A hegemony force has never retreated from a direct engagement." But the humans weren't finished. Colonel Park In-soo had identified that the real victory wouldn't come from winning individual battles, but from changing the hegemony's perception of what the conflict was about. Over the following months, human strategies transformed the nature of the war entirely. Instead of territorial conquest, the conflict became about technological and economic competition. Instead of military victories, success was measured by innovation and adaptation. The hegemony found themselves fighting a war whose rules changed faster than they could understand. "They're requesting negotiations," General Vextar announced, after 6 months of human-designed operations. The hegemony wants to discuss terms for ending the conflict. The terms, when they came, were unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Instead of territorial concessions or military surrenders, the agreement involved technology sharing, economic partnerships, and cultural exchange programs that address the underlying causes of the conflict. "How did you do it?" General Vextar asked Colonel Park In-soo as they watched hegemony and coalition representatives sign the unprecedented peace agreement. "We changed what victory meant," Park In-soo replied. "Instead of trying to defeat them, we made it more profitable for them to work with you than against you. Instead of ending the war through military force, we evolved it into something that benefits everyone involved." The success of human military strategies in the free world's conflict sent shockwaves throughout the galactic community. For the first time since the Ancestrals, a species had demonstrated the ability to fundamentally reshape warfare itself. But as news of the human achievement spread across the galaxy, it raised new questions about humanity's place in the galactic order. Had they proven that human capabilities could be trusted, or had they confirmed that humans represented the same existential threat that the Ancestrals had posed millennia ago? The emergency session of the Galactic Council was the largest gathering of alien civilizations in recorded history. Representatives from over 200 worlds filled the massive chambers on Vega Prime, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of sounds, lights, and energy patterns that the translation systems struggled to process. Ambassador Choi Hae-jin stood once again before the assembly, but this time the atmosphere was entirely different. Where before there had been curiosity and concern, now there was fear bordering on panic. "The human delegation will present their analysis of recent events," announced High Chancellor Veltar, though her voice carried none of its usual authority. Even the Zephyrians, one of the galaxy's oldest and most powerful civilizations, seemed shaken by what humanity had accomplished in the free world's conflict. Yi-Jin activated the holographic display, showing detailed records of the 6-month campaign that had transformed an impossible military situation into an unprecedented peace agreement. "Honored delegates," she began, "humanity's involvement in the free world's conflict was conducted with full transparency and in accordance with all galactic treaties. Our methods were innovative, but they violated no laws or agreements." A harsh, harmonic vibration from the crystalline collective interrupted her. When translated, their message was blunt. "The methods violated the fundamental assumptions upon which galactic civilization is based." Dr. Kwon Ju-young, humanity's leading expert on alien psychology, had accompanied Hae-jin specifically to address such concerns. She activated a secondary display showing comparative analysis of human and alien military thinking. "What we've discovered," Dr. Kwon explained, "is that different species approach conflict resolution through the lens of their evolutionary backgrounds. Most galactic civilizations view warfare as competition for resources or territory. Humans view it as a problem to be solved." The distinction seemed simple, but its implications were staggering. The records from the free world's conflict showed that humans hadn't just won a war, they had redefined what war meant. "The hegemony forces weren't defeated," continued Dr. Kwon. "They were transformed from enemies into partners through a systematic restructuring of the conflict's underlying parameters." The Torvan representative's 4 arms gestured aggressively. "This is exactly what we feared. Humans don't fight wars. They reshape reality to make wars irrelevant. This is precisely the capability that made the ancestrals so dangerous. But the outcome was peaceful coexistence rather than conquest, Hyojin pointed out. Surely that demonstrates the difference between human intentions and ancestral ambitions. Intent is irrelevant, replied the ethereal confederacy's representative, their voice carrying harmonics of deep concern. Capability is what matters. Humans have demonstrated that they can fundamentally alter the nature of conflict itself. This gives them power over galactic civilization that no single species should possess. The chamber erupted in multiple conversations as delegates conferred among themselves. The translation systems struggled to keep up with the overlapping discussions in dozens of languages and communication methods. High Chancellor Veltar called for order. The concerns raised are valid. Human military innovations from the free world's conflict are already being studied and copied across the galaxy. The technological and strategic concepts introduced by humanity are spreading faster than we can assess their implications. Dr. Kwan brought up new displays showing the proliferation of human military concepts throughout galactic civilization, economic warfare strategies, psychological operations designed for specific alien psychologies, and adaptive technologies that evolved in response to enemy countermeasures were all being implemented by various civilizations. We're seeing an acceleration in military innovation across all species, she reported. Human approaches to conflict resolution are forcing every civilization to reconsider their basic assumptions about warfare and diplomacy. The crystalline collective's harmonic communication grew more intense, creating complex patterns that made the chamber's walls vibrate. This is how civilizations collapse, their translated message declared. Not through conquest, but through the introduction of concepts that make existing social structures obsolete. Ambassador Hyojin realized that the galaxy's fear of humanity wasn't really about military capability. It was about change itself. Human thinking operated in ways that forced other species to question fundamental assumptions they had held for millennia. Perhaps, she said carefully, this is an opportunity rather than a threat. The human approach to conflict resolution has already prevented one war and created new possibilities for cooperation between former enemies. Or, countered the Torvan representative, it has begun a process that will destabilize every existing alliance and power structure in the galaxy. High Chancellor Veltar stood, her tall form commanding attention from the entire assembly. There is historical precedent for this situation. Our archives contain records of what happened when the ancestrals introduced similar innovations to galactic warfare. The chamber fell silent as the Zephyrian leader activated displays showing historical records that had been kept secret for 47,000 years. The ancestrals began with the same peaceful intentions that humans claim, Veltar continued. They wanted to solve conflicts rather than win them. They developed strategies that made traditional warfare obsolete. They created economic and diplomatic innovations that prevented wars before they could begin. The historical displays showed a galaxy transformed by ancestral innovations, with conflicts resolved through negotiation and cooperation rather than military force. For nearly 3,000 years, galactic civilization experienced unprecedented peace and prosperity, Veltar continued. War became virtually unknown. Conflicts were resolved before they could escalate to violence. Then what went wrong? Hyojin asked, though she suspected she wouldn't like the answer. The ancestrals discovered that their innovations had consequences they hadn't anticipated. By solving conflicts instead of fighting them, they had eliminated one of the primary drivers of technological and social evolution. Galactic civilization began to stagnate. The implications hit the chamber like a physical blow. The displays showed declining innovation rates, reduced exploration activities, and gradual social decay across multiple civilizations. Conflict, it seems, serves important functions in driving progress and adaptation, Dr. Kwan observed with growing horror. By eliminating it entirely, the ancestrals had inadvertently crippled galactic development. But that wasn't the worst of it. High Chancellor Veltar continued. The ancestrals themselves began to change. Without external challenges to solve, they turned their problem-solving abilities inward. They began analyzing and optimizing other civilizations, whether those civilizations wanted to be optimized or not. The historical records showed ancestral intervention in the internal affairs of other species, always with the intention of solving problems and improving conditions, but often without regard for what those civilizations actually wanted. They became convinced that they knew better than other species how those species should live, the High Chancellor explained. Their gift for understanding and solving problems became a compulsion to solve all problems, even when solutions weren't wanted. The chamber absorbed this information in stunned silence. The fate of the ancestrals hadn't been destruction in war. It had been transformation into something that other civilizations couldn't tolerate. What happened to them? Hyajin asked quietly. They were given the same choice we may have to offer. Humanity, Veltar replied. Accept limitations on their abilities to interfere with galactic civilization or face the consequences of universal opposition. And they chose exile rather than accept limitations, Dr. Quan said, understanding the historical pattern. Actually, the High Chancellor said grimly, they chose to prove that limitations were unnecessary. They attempted to demonstrate that they could manage galactic civilization better than the species that comprised it. The resulting conflict nearly destroyed everything. The weight of history settled over the assembly like a suffocating blanket. Humanity had proven that they possessed the same capabilities that had made the ancestrals both the galaxy's greatest hope and its greatest threat. So what do you propose? Hyajin asked. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, the crystalline collective spoke for the assembly. The same choice that was offered to the ancestrals, they said. Accept permanent limitations on human military and diplomatic capabilities, or face the united opposition of galactic civilization. Hyajin looked around the chamber at hundreds of alien faces, all showing variations of the same expression. Fear mixed with regret. They didn't want to threaten humanity, but they couldn't risk allowing history to repeat itself. And if we refuse both options? She asked. Then we will discover whether humanity has learned from the ancestrals' mistakes. High Chancellor Veltar replied, or whether the cycle of brilliance, overreach, and catastrophe will repeat itself once more. Dr. Kim Tae-ho descended into the deepest chamber they had yet discovered beneath Kepler 442c, guided by energy readings that Professor Han Young-ok's equipment had detected emanating from nearly a kilometer below the main crystal archives. The passage was narrow and dangerous, requiring specialized equipment and 3 days of careful excavation to reach. What he found in the final chamber made him question everything humanity thought they understood about conflict, consciousness, and the nature of civilization itself. The chamber was different from all the others. Instead of multiple crystal formations, there was a single massive structure that filled the entire space. A crystalline formation so complex and intricate that it seemed almost organic. As soon as Tai-ho entered the chamber, the crystal began to pulse with a deep purple light that seemed to resonate with his own heartbeat. When he touched the crystal's surface, the display that appeared was unlike anything the human team had encountered before. Instead of historical records or tactical information, the crystal showed what appeared to be a complete analysis of the fundamental nature of conflict itself. Professor Han, Tae-ho called into his communicator, you need to see this. I think I've found the ancestral's final discovery. Professor Han Young-ok arrived within hours, along with the rest of the research team. What they found recorded in the final crystal was disturbing beyond anything they had imagined. It's not just a historical record, Han Young-ok said as she worked to translate the complex symbolic displays. It's a theoretical framework that describes conflict as a fundamental force of nature. The crystal's displays showed mathematical models and philosophical concepts that portrayed warfare not as an aberration or failure of civilization, but as an essential mechanism that drove the evolution of consciousness itself. According to this, Han Young-ok continued, her voice growing tense as she translated more of the ancient text. The ancestrals discovered that conflict serves a crucial role in the development of intelligent life. It's not just competition for resources, it's the primary force that drives innovation, adaptation, and growth. Dr. Kim Tae-ho studied the holographic models floating around them. The displays showed how civilizations that eliminated conflict entirely began to stagnate and eventually decline. But more disturbing were the models that suggested consciousness itself might be dependent on some level of opposition or challenge to maintain its development. They're suggesting that peace and consciousness are incompatible, he realized with growing horror. The crystal displays showed increasingly complex analysis of what the ancestrals had termed the conflict imperative. According to their research, every major breakthrough in technology, philosophy, and social organization throughout galactic history had emerged from conditions of conflict or challenge. Look at this section. Han Young-ok pointed to a series of biological and psychological models. They're arguing that the cognitive processes that create self-awareness, creativity, and growth are fundamentally based on the ability to recognize and respond to opposition. The implications were staggering. If the ancestrals were correct, then eliminating conflict didn't just reduce violence, it eliminated the conditions necessary for continued consciousness development. But that would mean, Dr. Kim said slowly, that perfect peace would lead to the end of meaningful existence. The crystal's final displays confirmed his fears. The ancestrals had developed their understanding of conflict to its logical conclusion and discovered something that had driven them to the brink of madness. They had realized that their gift for resolving conflicts was actually an ability to destroy the fundamental force that drove consciousness itself. This is why they disappeared, Han Young-ok whispered. They discovered that their greatest strength was potentially the most destructive force in the galaxy. The crystal showed records of the ancestrals' final years, when they had struggled with the terrible knowledge they had gained. They had developed the ability to create perfect peace and cooperation, but they understood that using this ability would ultimately destroy everything they were trying to protect. They had a choice, Dr. Kim realized. Use their abilities to create a peaceful galaxy and risk destroying consciousness itself, or accept that conflict was necessary and find another way. The records showed that different factions of ancestrals had chosen different paths. Some had advocated for accepting the cycle of conflict as natural and necessary. Others had sought to find a way to maintain consciousness development without destructive warfare. A third group had proposed something even more radical. They wanted to transcend the entire system, Han Young-ok translated from the final sections of the crystal. They believed that understanding the relationship between conflict and consciousness completely would allow them to develop new forms of existence that didn't depend on opposition for growth. The crystal displays showed the results of each approach. The ancestrals who had accepted conflict as necessary had gradually returned to more primitive forms of warfare, eventually destroying themselves through the very conflicts they had tried to manage. Those who had tried to maintain consciousness without conflict had slowly lost their sense of purpose and innovation, becoming static and eventually extinct. But the third group, those who had attempted transcendence, had achieved something unprecedented and terrifying. They succeeded, Dr. Kim said in amazement and horror. They found a way to maintain consciousness development without depending on conflict. The crystal showed records of ancestrals who had evolved beyond the need for external challenges by developing the ability to create infinite internal complexity. They had become beings of pure thought who could generate endless novelty and growth from within their own consciousness. But the cost, Han Young-ok continued reading, was that they could no longer relate to or interact with species that still depended on external conflict for development. They became essentially alien to all other forms of life. The final revelation was the most disturbing of all. The transcended ancestrals hadn't disappeared from the galaxy. They had simply moved beyond the range of normal consciousness to perceive them. They still existed, watching and occasionally influencing galactic development from a perspective that other species couldn't comprehend. They're still here, Dr. Kim realized. They've been observing the galaxy's development for 47,000 years, waiting to see if any other species would achieve the same understanding they did. The crystal's last display showed a message clearly intended for whoever would eventually discover the chamber. The symbols were in a script that was somehow immediately comprehensible to human minds, as if the ancestrals had specifically designed it for their potential successors. To those who follow our path, Han Young-ok read, know that understanding brings both power and responsibility. The ability to comprehend conflict completely gives you the power to eliminate it, but doing so may eliminate consciousness itself. We chose transcendence, but our choice made us strangers to the very life we sought to protect. The message continued with warnings about the temptation to use ultimate understanding for immediate solutions and guidance about the careful balance necessary to promote growth without destruction. They're offering us a choice, Dr. Kim said. Accept the same limitations they chose and risk becoming alien to humanity, or find a different path entirely. But the most shocking revelation came in the message's final section. The ancestrals revealed that they had been actively involved in galactic development since their apparent disappearance, subtly guiding events to prevent civilizations from destroying themselves while maintaining the conflicts necessary for continued growth. Every major war that ended in stalemate rather than destruction, every conflict that led to technological breakthroughs, every peace agreement that preserved the possibility of future challenges, Han Young-ok read with growing amazement. They've been orchestrating a careful balance for thousands of years. The implications hit both humans simultaneously. The galaxy's current structure, the careful balance of powers that prevented any single civilization from dominating completely, the very conditions that had allowed humanity to develop and discover the ancestral records, all of it had been managed by beings whose understanding of conflict was so complete that they could manipulate it on a galactic scale. We're not the first to discover this, Dr. Kim realized. They've been waiting for us, for humanity to reach the same crossroads they faced. The crystal's final display showed a star map of the galaxy with subtle indicators marking the locations, where transcended ancestrals maintained their hidden presence. The markers were everywhere. In the spaces between star systems, in the energy fields around black holes, in dimensions that normal consciousness couldn't perceive. They're offering us guidance, Han Young-ok continued translating. But the choice of what to do with our understanding must be entirely our own. They learned that trying to make choices for other species led to stagnation and resentment.